They say there are things in Las Vegas you're not supposed to see. Dean Martin saw one of them on October 14th, 1966. He'd been given room 916 at the Sands, but when he got off the elevator at 2:47 in the morning, tired and buzzed from performing, his eyes played tricks on him. He went to room 914 instead. The door wasn't fully locked. It opened when he turned his key. Inside, a man sat slumped over, blood dripping from his mouth. Three men in expensive suits stood around him like priests at a dark ceremony. Dean's breath caught in his throat. He tried to back out quietly, but it was too late. They'd already seen him. To understand what happened in that room and why Dean Martin walked out alive, you need to understand what the Sands Hotel really was in 1966. It wasn't just a casino. It wasn't just an entertainment venue. The Sands was the crown jewel of organized crime's Las Vegas empire. The Chicago outfit, the New York families, they all had pieces of it. The money that flowed through those slot machines, those card tables, those showrooms, it went straight into the pockets of men whose names you didn't say out loud. And Dean Martin, whether he admitted it or not, was part of that machine. He performed there almost exclusively. He drew the crowds. He kept the high rollers happy. He was the face that made the Sands look legitimate, while the real business happened in back rooms and penthouse suites. Dean knew the score. He'd grown up in Steubenville, Ohio, where his father's barber shop was a front for illegal gambling. He'd seen mob guys his whole life. He knew how to act around them, respectful but not afraid, friendly but not familiar. It was a dance, and Dean was good at it. But on October 14th, 1966, that dance was about to get a lot more complicated. Dean had performed two shows that night, a 9 p.m. and a midnight, both sold out. The crowd had been electric, hanging on every note, every joke, every smooth gesture. After the second show, Dean did what he always did. He signed a few autographs, took a few photos, then retreated to the backstage bar where the performers and the connected guys would mix. There was a man there that night. His name was Tony Marcello. He was a capo in the Chicago outfit, one of the men who actually ran the Sands behind the scenes. Tony bought Dean a drink. They talked about the show, about the weather, about nothing important. But as Dean was leaving, Tony said something strange. "Dean, you're in 916 tonight, right?" "Yeah, why?" Tony smiled. "Just making sure. Stay in your room tonight, pal. Get some rest. Don't go wandering around." It was said casually, like friendly advice, but Dean heard the edge underneath. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an instruction. Dean nodded. "Sure thing, Tony. I'm beat anyway." He headed to the elevator. His head was swimming a little from the drinks and the exhaustion. 2 shows a night, 5 nights a week. It was taking a toll. He was 49 years old and starting to feel every year. He got off on the 9th floor. The hallway was dimly lit, that amber glow that all hotels had back then. The carpet was thick, muffling his footsteps. He walked down the hall, fumbling with his room key. His eyes were tired. The numbers on the doors blurred together. He stopped in front of what he thought was 916. He slid the key in. It turned. The lock clicked open. Dean pushed the door open and stepped inside. And that's when everything stopped. The room was dark except for a single lamp in the corner. In that dim light, Dean saw him, a man in a chair, hands tied behind his back, head slumped forward, blood dripping from his mouth onto his white shirt, creating dark flowers that spread slowly across the fabric. Standing around him were 3 men, all in dark suits, all perfectly still, like statues. One of them was holding a revolver with a silencer attached. Wisps of smoke were still curling from the barrel. For a moment, nobody moved, nobody spoke. Dean's hand was still on the doorknob, his body frozen in the doorway, his mind trying to process what he was seeing. And then one of the men turned toward him. Dean recognized him immediately. It was Vincent Esposito, one of the most feared enforcers in the Chicago outfit, a man who'd reportedly killed over a dozen people. Vincent looked at Dean. Dean looked back. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Dean's first instinct was to run, to back out of the room, sprint down the hallway, get as far away as possible. But he knew that was the wrong move. Running made you look guilty. Running made you look like a witness who needed to be silenced. So instead, Dean did something that took more courage than running ever could. He stayed calm. He looked at Vincent Esposito and said in a voice that didn't shake, "Wrong room." My apologies." Vincent stared at him, his face expressionless, his hand still holding the gun. Then Vincent said, "This is 914, Dean." "Yeah, I see that now," Dean replied, keeping his voice steady. "I'm supposed to be in 916. The hallway's dark. I got confused." Another long silence. The other two men were watching now, waiting to see what Vincent would do. Vincent tilted his head slightly. "You didn't see anything." It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a command. Dean nodded. "I didn't see anything." "You didn't open this door." "I didn't open this door." "You went straight to your room, 916, and you went to sleep." Dean held Vincent's gaze. "That's exactly what happened." Vincent studied him for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled. Not a warm smile, a cold, calculating smile that made Dean's blood run colder than the fear already in his veins. "You're a smart guy, Dean. That's why we like you. Go to your room. Get some sleep. Forget you were ever on this floor tonight." Dean nodded. He didn't say anything else. He backed out slowly, pulled the door closed, and stood in the hallway for a moment, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst through his chest. His hands were shaking. His legs felt weak. But he didn't run. He walked calmly down the hall to room 916. He put his key in the correct door this time. He went inside. He locked the door behind him. And then he sat down on the edge of the bed and tried to process what had just happened. Dean Martin didn't sleep that night. He sat in his room with all the lights on, chain-smoking cigarettes, replaying the scene over and over in his mind. The man in the chair, the blood, the gun. Vincent Esposito's cold smile. He knew what he'd walked into. He'd witnessed a mob execution, the kind of thing that got people killed for seeing. He also knew that Vincent had let him live for a reason, not out of kindness, not out of mercy, but because killing Dean Martin would have brought too much heat, too many questions, too much attention from the press and the authorities. Dean was useful alive. He filled seats. He made money. He kept the sands at the top of the Vegas entertainment world. But that usefulness came with a price. Dean now owed Vincent Esposito, and men like Vincent always collected on their debts. The next morning, Dean went down to the lobby around 10 a.m. He was exhausted, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep and too many cigarettes. He sat at the coffee shop, ordered eggs and toast, tried to act normal. That's when Tony Marcello appeared. He slid into the booth across from Dean without being invited. "Morning, Dean. You sleep okay?" Dean looked at him. "Like a baby." Tony smiled. "Good. That's good. You know, I told you to stay in your room last night. I was looking out for you." "I appreciate that, Tony. Vincent told me you handled yourself well. Very professional. He was impressed." Dean said nothing. He took a sip of his coffee. Tony leaned forward slightly. "Here's the thing, Dean. You're part of the family now, whether you wanted to be or not. You saw something you shouldn't have seen, but you did the smart thing. You kept your mouth shut. That means we can trust you." "I'm just an entertainer, Tony. I don't want to be part of anything." Tony's smile didn't waver. "You don't have a choice. But don't worry. As long as you keep doing what you're doing, keep performing, keep bringing in the crowds, keep your mouth shut about things that don't concern you, you'll be fine, more than fine. You'll be protected." Dean understood what that meant. He was now under the outfit's protection, which sounded good, except it also meant he was under their control. Tony stood up. "Enjoy your breakfast, Dean. See you at the show tonight." He walked away, leaving Dean sitting alone with his cold eggs and the weight of a secret that would haunt him for years. Over the next several weeks, Dean Martin learned what it meant to be protected by the mob. Vincent Esposito started showing up at his dressing room before shows, not threatening, not demanding, just present. Sitting in the corner, smoking a cigar, making small talk about the weather or the show. It was a reminder, a constant, quiet reminder that Vincent was watching, that Dean belonged to them now. Other things started happening too. Dean would make requests, small things like wanting a specific type of scotch or needing tickets for a friend, and they would appear instantly. No questions asked, no hesitation. He was being taken care of, pampered, made comfortable. It was the mob's way of making sure he stayed loyal. But Dean hated it. He hated feeling owned. He'd spent his whole career building an image of independence, of cool detachment, of a man who answered to nobody. Now he was answering to Vincent Esposito. Frank Sinatra noticed something was wrong. They were having dinner one night at the Sands, and Frank said, "You seem off lately, Dino. Something bothering you?" Dean shook his head. "Just tired, Frank. Too many shows." Frank studied him. "If something's going on, you can tell me. You know that, right?" Dean wanted to tell him. He wanted to tell someone, but he knew he couldn't. If word got out that he'd witnessed an execution, even to Frank, it could put both of them in danger. So he just smiled and said, "I'm fine, Pally, really." But he wasn't fine. He was trapped, and he didn't see a way out. The breaking point came 6 weeks later, in late November 1966. Dean was in his dressing room after a show when Vincent Esposito walked in. But this time, Vincent wasn't alone. He was with two other men, both looking serious. "Dean, we need to talk," Vincent said, closing the door behind him. Dean's stomach dropped. "About what?" Vincent sat down. "There's a situation. We need your help with something." "What kind of help?" "There's a guy, a federal investigator. He's been sniffing around the Sands, asking questions about our operation. We need someone to have a conversation with him. Someone respectable, someone he'd trust." Dean's blood ran cold. "You want me to talk to a federal agent?" "We want you to invite him to your show, comp him some tickets, make him feel special, get him talking, find out what he knows." Dean shook his head. "I can't do that. That's way beyond." Vincent's expression darkened. "You can, and you will, because you owe us, Dean. We protected you. We kept you alive when most guys in your situation would have ended up in the desert. Now we're calling in that favor." Dean felt trapped, cornered. If he refused, he knew what would happen. But if he agreed, he'd be crossing a line he could never come back from. He'd become an informant. For the mob. For a long moment, Dean said nothing. He just sat there, feeling the walls closing in. And then he made a decision. A dangerous decision, but the only one that felt right. "No." Vincent's eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" "I said no, Vincent. I'm not doing it. I'm a singer. I'm not a spy. I'm not an informant. I walked into the wrong room 6 weeks ago, and I kept my mouth shut like you asked. But this is different. I won't do it." The room went silent. The two men with Vincent shifted uncomfortably. Vincent stood up slowly. He walked over to Dean, standing close enough that Dean could smell his cologne. "Dean, you're making a mistake." "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." Vincent stared at him for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he laughed. A genuine laugh. "You got balls, Dean. I'll give you that. You know I could make you disappear, right?" "I know. So why risk it?" Dean looked him in the eyes. "Because I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees. I've spent my whole life being my own man. I'm not changing that now. Not for you. Not for anybody." Vincent studied him. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, Dean, I respect that. You're off the hook. We won't ask you to do anything like this again." Dean was stunned. "Just like that?" "Just like that. But understand something. This is a one-time courtesy because I like you. Because you've been good for business. But don't ever walk into the wrong room again. Don't ever put yourself in a position where you see something you shouldn't, because next time I won't be so understanding." Dean nodded. "Understood." Vincent and his men left, and Dean sat alone in his dressing room, shaking from the adrenaline and relief. He'd stood up to the mob, and somehow, miraculously, he'd survived. The story of what happened in room 914 at the Sands Hotel never became public knowledge. Dean never told anyone. Not Frank, not Sammy, not even his closest family members. It was a secret he carried with him for the rest of his life. But it changed him. Friends noticed that after late 1966, Dean became more cautious, more private. He stopped staying at the Sands as much, preferring to rent houses when he performed in Vegas. He also became more selective about who he spent time with. He distanced himself from some of the shadier characters who hung around the casinos. In interviews years later, when asked about his relationship with organized crime in Las Vegas, Dean would always give the same answer. "I knew those guys. Everybody knew those guys. But I was just an entertainer. I sang, I told jokes, I went home. It was the truth. But it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that on October 14th, 1966, Dean Martin walked into the wrong room at exactly the wrong time. He saw something that should have gotten him killed. But he stayed calm. He stayed smart. And when the mob tried to own him, he refused. That refusal, that moment of defiance in his dressing room, when he said no to Vincent Esposito, was one of the bravest things Dean Martin ever did. It wasn't on stage. It wasn't in front of cameras. It was in private, in the shadows, where nobody would ever see it. But it defined who Dean Martin really was. Not just the king of cool, but a man who refused to be controlled, even when his life depended on it. The man in room 914 was never identified publicly. His body was never found. It's assumed he ended up somewhere in the Nevada desert, another casualty of the mob's iron grip on Las Vegas. Dean Martin lived another 29 years after that night. He continued performing, making movies, entertaining millions. But those who knew him best said that something changed after 1966. A shadow in his eyes, a hesitation when he walked into hotel rooms. He never forgot what he saw. He never forgot how close he came. And he never, ever walked into the wrong room again. That's the untold story of the night Dean Martin's luck ran out and his courage saved him. A story about secrets, survival, and the price of staying silent in a city built on sin. In Las Vegas, there are things you're not supposed to see. Dean Martin saw one of them. And somehow, against all odds, he lived to never tell about it, until now.